Good evening, Mr. White, and thank you. What's new in States?
Well, we're just having some different weather patterns, and we're kind of going hot and cold, but overall, all is well. There's a heated presidential campaign, but I'm
Who's gonna
going.
be the winner?
Well, you know what? I would stay away from the presidential predictions, but it looks like it's going to be a very well contested contest, and they just had the primaries here in South Carolina for the Republicans, and then in about a week they'll have it for the Democrats.
All right. Mr. White, let's talk about Romania. Why are you so interested about Romania right now? You are still looking with a huge attention in about Bucharest and Romanian politics. Why?
Well, because of genuine concern for the people who have been left behind. It's well known that 5% of the wealthy population of Romania care only about themselves, while 95% of the hardworking, law-abiding citizens of Romania are struggling from day to day, and that 5%, a vast majority of them are politicians and corporate folks. They are living on what we call fruits of a crime from a corrupt lifestyle. And in my view, and in the view of many others who are not willing to come forward and say what's right, is that their philosophy is the only thing right is to get by, and the only thing wrong is to get caught. So it's sort of like the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. And the reason they find my interviews troubling is that I'm going to be, as always, very direct, very truthful, and it steps on the toes of those who are very corrupt. And it's unfortunate that somebody outside of your borders has to come forward to say, look at what you're doing to the innocent, hardworking Romanians who are just trying to get by, trying to feed their families, and it's literally a lack of leadership.
Yeah, you are right.
But Robert, let's take that a step further.
Okay.
Here's the troubling thing. All too often in Romania and the United States and anywhere else, but particularly in Romania because I lived there for 5 years. So I'm not speaking so much as an outsider, probably only where citizenship is concerned. I'm not a Romanian citizen, obviously, but I lived and worked there. So I'm not speaking based upon something that I read in a book or something that somebody told me. What happens is your show will come on, and people of goodwill say, yes, 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 he's right. Oh, we got to stop this. And the corrupt politicians, especially the ones in your parliament, they're sitting there, they're going, okay, well, we'll just wait them out. We'll wait for this to blow over, and then we'll go back to our corrupt ways. Meanwhile, starving farmers in Buzău are just struggling because they're left out. They're not a part of that 5% that's living what we call high on the hog. I know because I lived next to them when I was in Stujardi, living there for 3 of the 5 years that I lived in Romania. So I know the lavish lifestyles that they live there. And you know what, Robert? Here's the thing that really bothers me.
Just tell us more about Stejari.
Yes.
Okay, and the politicians who are living there.
Yes.
How's the lifestyle there? Huh?
The lifestyle there makes you cringe when you think about that. I think it was about 28 million euro that was spent on that lavish country club. Now, think about this for a second. There's nothing wrong with a lifestyle that you can afford. But what I have a problem with is all those wealthy people who are rolling in and out of there in Bentleys, in Rolls Royces, in Maseratis. That's great. But my question is, what about that poor farmer who is just struggling to make ends meet and who is trying to make it work? But what you find is the people in Stajati, they're not helping poor Romanians. They don't care about the poor Romanians. They only care about how they can embezzle and steal, rob, and cheat others to fatten their bank accounts. Meanwhile, a vast majority of Romanians are living in sewers or starving on some farm somewhere, while the people in Stajati who live next to me are rolling around in 300,000 euro cars, and sometimes they have more than one. Those aren't the people who are helping the poor Romanians. This is what I find very troubling and upsetting. It's non-Romanians, the Americans, the Germans, the Brits, and a coalition of others who are helping poor people in Romania. Meanwhile, the rich, corrupt ones are rolling around living lavish lifestyles, and the wealthy, corrupt Romanians, vast majority of them are in your parliament and in corporate Romania. They're living lavish lifestyles, saying, "Oh, you know what? Let's just let the Westerners, the French, the British, the Germans, and the United States, let them take care of the poor people in Romania, while we live high on the hog and continue to be corrupt and steal and cheat and lie and rob, and let the outsiders take care of the poor Romanians." And that's what I find upsetting, very disappointing. And you know what, Robert? It's a fact that they can't run and hide from. So what they will do, they being the corrupt folks who run your country, they will wait until this interview blow over, and they say, well, it'll make a splash, and then we'll go back to being corrupt, taking bribes, and committing fraud all across the country at the expense of the poor Romanians.
Darren, in one of your interviews, you stated that it would be a good idea to import foreign politicians for the Romanian parliament. It was a joke, or?
Your message is broken. You might have to repeat it because I got bits and pieces of it.
In one of your interview a few weeks ago, you stated that it would be a good idea to import foreign politicians for the Romanian parliament.
Yes.
It was a joke, or do you believe that it really would be a good idea?
It was absolutely not. It was absolutely not a joke. It was 100% serious. And Robert, I'm glad you brought that up because I want to expound on that.
Yeah.
Because when you look at this vicious cycle of corruption in your parliament, and we know that probably at least 85% of them are taking bribes, committing fraud, and a host of other things. I remember one case in particular where a senator was recorded blackmailing a shop owner, saying, hey, if you don't pay your monthly fees, I'm going to send somebody there to physically beat you. This corrupt senator was let off the hook by his other corrupt friends in your parliament because the victims did not have permission to record this corrupt senator squeezing him for money. When you have blatant crimes like this that are done with impunity, knowing that there is no system in place, no rule of law to put this guy in check, to put this guy in prison where he belongs, of course that's encouraging his friends. So let's go back to the problem, because you're asking the crooks to police the crooks. That's why that vicious cycle of corruption is not broken. And the way you break that vicious cycle is you bring in a number of Americans, French, the British, the Germans. You're basically bringing in a coalition of honest politicians to come in and clean up the mess that Romania has failed to do since communism fell.
But
So,
Darren, is it possible, I mean, in real life, is it possible to import foreign politicians?
I think I understood your question. Is this a very realistic approach?
I said if it's real, if it could be real to import foreign politicians for Romania.
That's the only way you're going to break this vicious cycle of corruption. As a matter of fact,
But how can we do it? How can we do it?
it takes the will of the people of I think when you put enough pressure, international pressure, on the corruption in your parliament, be it the EU, be it the American coalition of partners, be it NATO, which Romania is a part of both, it boils down to leadership. And here's why, Robert. The theory in this case would be you start out with 5 Americans, 5 Brits, 5 Germans, 5 French, and you increase that footprint. Mm-hmm. You can't just have a small number of international honest politicians. You increase that footprint, and slowly but surely that corruption is going to die out because you're going to choke it out with the presence of legitimate leaders in the parliament. And when the corrupt people that are ruining your country and driving it into the ground, when they realize, hey, the international community is not going to put up with this foolishness anymore. They're either going to straighten up and walk right, or they're going to be thrown out. And so the sad part of it is you're having to bring in international intervention mm-hmm. to get Romania to get out of this dark hole of corruption. And think about it. When was the last time you had a parliament that's worthy of trust and confidence? Not in our lifetime. And the thing is, if you say, well, let's just vote them out, that's not the answer. You know why? Because when you vote them out, the ones that come in are going to be more corrupt than the ones that are in there already. So you got to break that vicious cycle. And you know what? Here's the thing, Robert. Poll the politicians and find out what their solution is. They don't have it. They don't have a solution.
Yeah, you are right. You are right.
No. I am very certain that I'm right, because that's why they get angry when I step up and tell the truth. Because they can't handle the truth. And what it does, it reveals their nakedness. Their nakedness is they can't defend being as corrupt as they are. And I remember hearing Romanians tell me all the time, well, when we were under communism, the Americans didn't come and rescue us. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? Americans are the biggest targets of Romanian fraud. And we know that. The attitude with the Romanian leadership is, oh, you guys are super rich and they'll never miss that money, so it shouldn't be a big deal. We should be able to steal and rob from you guys at whim, and it's not a big deal. But the reason the politicians in Romania, Robert, are looking the other way on all of these crimes against American citizens is that those monies are coming back into the Romanian economy. So although it's fraudulent funds, keep in mind when they steal. By the way, I know because I was the agent in charge of monitoring this stuff. The Romanians steal over $1 billion a year in fraud. And what they can do is they hide behind weak laws because the parliament is not going to put forth laws to put these guys in check. Secondly, they're benefiting from it because, remember, those stolen dollars are going back into the Romanian economy. And thirdly, if they do get caught, the judges and prosecutors, they'll get a percentage of the fraudulent money. So it's a win-win for Romania. They have no desire to cut their cash flow. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, but Darren, in regard to this, the ex-prime minister, Mr. Victor Ponta, you know, yeah, said that we don't need a person from the American SPP, the Romanian Protection and Guard Service, okay, to come and slap Romania on the face, and that if you had proposed this in the US Congress, you would be disregarded.
I'm glad you brought that up. That statement in and of itself tells you that he has no clue about an answer. He did and it's kind of laughable because he didn't even give you any remotely close idea of a clue about what to do about it. Mm-hmm. The only thing he could do is sling mud and cast doubt towards me. Fine. But what did he put on the table in the way of a solution? A big fat zero. Somebody should have had the intestinal fortitude to call him on it. Say, wait a second, you're slinging mud and casting doubt because somebody told the truth. But you're a big fat zero where it comes to putting a solution on the table. And it's obvious that he's not a part of the solution. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this problem. So good for him to try to, cast doubt on somebody who's going to stand up and tell the truth. He had a big fat zero when it came to putting solutions on the table. Someone should challenge him and say, hey, Mr. Prime Minister, what's your solution? I can tell you before he even tells you. Zero. Mm-hmm. A resounding zero. So I'm glad he cast light on himself. You know how they say the old adage is the fish doesn't get caught unless he opens his mouth? There's a prime example right there. He had absolutely nothing to put on the table in the way of a solution because he's a part of the problem.
But Darren, have you ever met Mr. Ponta here in Romania? Probably yes, yeah?
I think I may have been in the same circles, but there was no reason for me to meet
Sorry,
him.
there's a bad connection. Can you repeat it?
I think I'm sure I found myself in the same circles as he, but there was no real reason for me to meet him. I would only meet him if it were for official business.
Yeah.
So there was no reason for me to meet with him.
What do you think about his period when he was prime minister?
Well, that's an easy question and answer. Romanians have to look in the mirror and say, hey, at the beginning of his administration,
yeah,
are we better off now or before? And that's a resounding zero. So once again, when he stepped up to the plate to cast mud and sling doubt towards me, one has to wonder, what was his solution? And is Romania better off as a result of his tenure? I'll leave that up to the Romanian people, but it's pretty obvious. And I don't think that he went out of office under the best of circumstances. I think I remember seeing vast protests all across your country because of him. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that his was the most glorious exit.
What do you think about this technocratic solution for government here in Romania right now? Is it good? It was a good idea to have a technocratic government?
You know what? One of the things that I think is most important is to do what's right for, it's this idea of the greatest good for the greatest number. Whatever solution is right for Romania. For example, when the Prime Minister said the Americans wouldn't be happy if we came over and told them what the composition of their Congress should be. Well, you know what? If we had corrupt politicians in our Congress or in our House of Representatives, we would deal with that swiftly, immediately, and very decisively. So what's best for the Romanian people should be up to the Romanian people. Unfortunately, it's such, it's tough to find answers when the fraud runs so deep. The fraud and corruption, it's tough to find. You know how when you go into a foreign country, you're looking for somebody to be in a partnership, trying to make it better for everybody. It's very difficult for the Americans to come in there to look for honest, law-abiding partners who have the interests of the Romanian people at heart. The leadership in Romania is only concerned about how they can get more money, be it corrupt, ill-gotten gains, by crimes, by fraud. And that's the reputation that Romania carries throughout the national community. So how can someone sit next to the Prime Minister or the President of Romania knowing that Romania is not doing the right thing by its people? And there's certainly a lot of human rights concerns over in Romania. How can you sit legitimately to people from France or Germany or the UK or the United States? How can you sit there as a legitimate partner when there are all kinds of questions about fraud throughout your country? They don't look at you as a credible partner.
Darren, let's talk about politicians again. In 2009, you've been here in Romania?
I arrived in Romania in November of 2009, correct.
Okay. Yes, but in 2009, there was a referendum in which Romanians expressed their desire to have 300 members in parliament. Now they are 588 members right now. Do you think that people's wish should be taken into consideration? I mean, to reduce the number of politicians in the parliament?
If that's the will of the Romanian people, then that should be in a democratic society. If it's the will of the people, then that's the way the government should go. That's why you have representatives in your parliament. The ideal scenario would be for the Romanian politicians to represent the best interest of its constituents. But that's not the case in Romania. The case in Romania is that you got corruption there, people who are busy taking money. The least of their concerns are poor Romanians who are trying to make it every day. Every single one of those people in your parliament got one focus in mind. Where can I get the next bribe? How can I take the most money? Mm-hmm. And the only time people get prosecuted in Romania is when they're on a political hit list. In other words, they've crossed another politician or another power broker. That's when suddenly they start to enforce laws there, only because it's more retaliatory as opposed to the rule of law, law and order. And Robert, don't be misled by my comments. America and the leadership of the American embassy, they have an important role to play. And if they don't step up to the plate and put pressure on Romania, the United States leadership, they have the ability to call in the Germans, the Brits, and the French, and all of the other democratic societies and say, hey, look, we need to put enough pressure on them to make them clean this up. And if it calls for international politicians to come in and do Romania's job for them, just think about the poor Romanians that are dependent on legitimate leadership. There's no hope because of that vicious cycle of fraud, greed, and embezzlement and corruption. How can one have hope when it's so rampant and it's so prevalent? And then you're looking for a 12-year-old school kid to have faith and confidence in the leadership when they see what's going on there. And the most embarrassing part is, and the politicians and the leadership of Romania, they know that what I'm saying is probably the only way you're going to see it happen, at least in our lifetime. Just if you start to think forward, based on the current climate there, I think there's little room for hope for the young, innocent Romanians growing up just looking for a way to have a decent life. That's the responsibility of the Romanian leadership, the politicians in your parliament, and they're busy stuffing their pockets with fraudulent money. There's no way they can concentrate on the needs of the Romanian people.
Darren, okay, as you probably know, this year would be an electoral year here in Romania. Let's try to find together right now 3 simple steps to reduce the corruption probably for the next future. I mean, how can we do it?
You know, Robert, that's a tough question.
Yes, I know, but...
And I'll do my best to give you an answer that's directly from the heart. You know, at the end of the day, it's really up to the Romanian people. And it's almost like pick your poison, pick the lesser of the evils. And we have that problem here in the United States. I'm not saying that the U.S. is free and clear of any problems. We got race problems and other stuff that we're dealing with as well. But let's focus on your question about Romania. I just think that the more people you can get registered to vote, the more people of goodwill. Probably what you see in the United States, for example, we have some people running for the presidency right now who have no political history. They're not politicians. They're coming from corporate America. They're coming from the private sector. We have a neurosurgeon, we have a media mogul, we have others who are actually making a difference. And it takes us outside of the regular political spectrum. So perhaps in Romania, if they can find an outsider who may not be so vulnerable to fraud and corruption, that would be a good starting point, because you can't pick from a corrupt pool of politicians to try to clean things up. That's not going to work. And it's proven that way for many, many years now in Romania. So I would say the answer would be, in the short term, get an outsider who's legitimate, and who's not going to be vulnerable to fraud and corruption. But got to remember something, Robert, that person is going to be surrounded by a bunch of corrupt politicians. So he's swimming in a shark-infested waters with corrupt politicians. So go back to my other recommendation about bringing in some foreigners to help clean up your parliament, and then also elect an outsider to run the presidency. I think that that probably would be the best way to get some traction to credibility, legitimacy in the eyes of the international community. And then others from the international community, once they see that happening, they would be more prone to jump in and say, hey, let's help Romania, because Romania is cleaning up its act, it's getting rid of fraud and corruption, it's helping the poor people pull out of poverty, it's doing all the right things by its citizens. Then the international community will come in and be more of a partner, as opposed to looking at Romania and trying to isolate it as a nation wrought with fraud and corruption.
Darren, do you still working for the U.S. Secret Service?
No, you know what, Robert? I'm retired now, and there could be some opportunities in the future for me. I'm not too anxious to jump back into the public arena right now, but we'll see what happens. I'm not working for the Secret Service anymore. I retired right after I left Romania, or right before I left Romania, and so for me, it's kind of taking it easy for now to see what might come in the future.
Okay, but what's your opinion about citizen surveillance by the services? Everybody knows that it's an international phenomenon. Is there a thin line between surveillance for security purposes and invasion of private space?
You know what, Robert? I have a firm position on that, and I'll be very direct about it.
Sorry, Darren, can
if
you
you're looking
repeat?
for criminal activity, if you
Sorry, Darren, can you repeat it, because there was a bad connection.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
Reference your question. I have a very firm position, very clear. As far as privacy versus security, or the compromise of privacy, governments in general are not interested in your personal life. I hope that they're interested in going after terrorists. I hope that they're going after criminals. They have absolutely no interest, at least from the American standpoint, of what's going on in your personal life. Therefore, if it were my decision, I would say that there is no reasonable expectation of privacy where it comes to criminal investigations, especially when you're looking for material support for terrorism. No stone should be left unturned. And if your privacy is temporarily invaded, so be it. At least we keep Romanian citizens safe, American citizens, all people of goodwill should be safe under the umbrella of protection by law enforcement, judges, prosecutors. We all have a commitment to keeping people safe. And if you have a temporary compromise of your personal information, so be it. At least you're safe.
Are you familiar with the DNA files right here in Romania? I mean the new files made by DNA?
Unfortunately, Robert, probably not, because I've not really been in the loop as far as ongoings currently in Romania.
But do you think that DNA made a good work during this time?
You know what? All too often, the people you see being prosecuted by DNA, DCOT, and the others, those are political targets. Those are people that they're mad at for various reasons. So those services, even your intelligence services, the SIE and the SRI, are often used for political purposes as opposed to what they're designed to do. So I would have some doubts about the legitimacy of.
Sorry, Darren, there's a bad connection again. If you can repeat it, or... Okay, can you repeat it? Bad connection again. Do you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you repeat it? Because it was
Sure.
a bad connection.
Sure. I would have serious doubts about the legitimacy of current and ongoing investigations by any of the bodies, DNA or DCOT or any of the others, or ANI or any of these others, because Most of their targets, Robert, are political targets, people that they're angry with versus a legitimate criminal investigation. So I would have some reservations about the legitimacy of their investigations. They're usually retaliatory because of politics.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And I can't violate any secrecy, but I will say that I'm speaking from personal experience. After working in Romania for 5 years, I know that most of their targets are political targets versus a legitimate criminal investigation.
Okay, do you think that Mrs. Kövesi must be reconfirmed in the top of the position in DNA structure?
I have serious doubts about her ability to be neutral, fair, and objective. I have some serious doubts about that.
But you probably know Mrs. Kövesi has a good reputation here in Romania
A good
and
public,
a huge wave of popularity.
yeah, from the public standpoint, yes.
Do you hear us?
Yes, I got you loud and clear.
Okay, okay. Let's talk about the international situation for a moment. What do you think about Russia and their actions? How to say? What about their fight with the rest of the world right now?
Well, you got to remember the Russians were considered a world power for a long time. And according to the current administration, the Russians are no longer a world power. They were characterized as a regional power. And in my view, in response to that, the Russians, of course, decided that they wanted to annex a part of the Ukraine, and then they're having a bombing campaign in Syria. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that has to do with Russia's president's desire to be considered a world power. And they have military interests, of course, in the Ukraine. And then, of course, their ties to the current regime in Syria it's not something that's deniable. So they have their own hidden agenda, and I think that people within the intelligence community are well aware of that.
What can we do? I mean, Romania, what can we do about in this kind of fight?
Well, I think that in this kind of fight, Romania has to make a commitment to the international community, particularly when it comes to NATO, and make certain, and you bring up an interesting point, Robert. Romania needs to clean up its own borders first before it tries to reach out to, say, Syrian refugees or try to tie into the international community to deal with Russia. Romania is weakened by its corruption and its fraud. So you clean up your own backyard first, and then you'll be better able to be an active participant in the international community.
Darren, are you intend to come back in Romania in the next future?
You know, I hope to. But I hope that I could come in a role where I can make a difference.
Really?
And
what kind of role?
That's not really up to me, but hopefully the possibility exists where I can come in a leadership position where I would have the ability to command and control what's done on the part of the Americans, especially when it comes to deal with corruption and fraud and things that need to be fixed. Come with a solution. Don't just stand around and criticize Romania. Come in a position of authority where you have the leverage to make a difference.
Great. We are looking forward for you.
I appreciate your time, and thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to the feedback from our time here on this interview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darren White.
Thank you. Enjoy yourself, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.